A thunderclap split the sky as Rebecca Evans clutched her coat tighter around her shoulders, her knuckles white with fear and cold. The year was 1879, and the desolate plains of the Arizona Territory had never felt more threatening. What had started as a simple journey to reunite with her uncle in Tucson had turned into a nightmare when the stagecoach driver, panicking at the sudden storm, had abandoned the passengers to seek shelter, promising to return with help. That had been hours ago. The other passengers, an elderly couple and a traveling salesman, had taken their chances and followed the driver's path toward a settlement rumored to be 5 miles east. Rebecca, having twisted her ankle climbing down from the coach, had chosen to remain behind, certain help would arrive soon. Now, as the desert storm intensified, whipping sand against her face and thunder rolling across the darkening sky, she questioned her decision. The abandoned stagecoach offered little protection as the wind rocked it precariously on its wheels. Rebecca huddled inside, watching through the window as visibility diminished with each gust. The storm had emerged with frightening speed, transforming the late afternoon into an apocalyptic dusk. A particularly violent gust threatened to topple the coach. Rebecca gasped, gathering her few belongings and stumbling outside. Better to face the storm than be crushed beneath the vehicle. The wind immediately assaulted her, nearly knocking her off her feet as stinging sand bit into her exposed skin. She limped a few yards before collapsing to her knees, the pain in her ankle unbearable. The world around her had become a beige blur of flying sand and dust. Tears streaked down her face, instantly dried by the relentless wind. "Hello," she called out, her voice swallowed by the howling storm. "Is anybody there?" The only answer was another crash of thunder. Rebecca crawled toward a large rock formation, hoping for some meager shelter. Her 23 years of life in Philadelphia had not prepared her for the brutality of the Western Territories. After her parents' death from influenza last winter, her uncle's invitation to join him had seemed like a blessing. Now it felt like a death sentence. The sound of hoofbeats cut through the storm's fury. At first, Rebecca thought she had imagined it a desperate hallucination born of fear. But then a silhouette emerged through the swirling sand, a horseman riding directly toward her. "Miss, are you all right?" A deep voice called out. Before she could answer, the man dismounted in one fluid motion and was beside her. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face partially obscured by a bandana pulled up against the sand. Only his eyes were visible, startlingly blue against the dusty landscape. "The stagecoach," she gasped, pointing toward the now barely visible vehicle. "The others left. My ankle." Without hesitation, the stranger removed his long duster coat and wrapped it around her, pulling her close against his chest. The sudden warmth and solidity of him made Rebecca's knees weaken further. "I'll be your shelter," he said, his voice low but carrying even through the storm's rage. "Hold tight to me now." He guided her toward his horse, a magnificent palomino that stood steady despite the chaos around them. With gentle but firm hands, he lifted her onto the saddle before mounting behind her. His arms encircled her as he took the reins, his body forming a protective barrier between Rebecca and the punishing elements. "I've got a place not far from here," he said close to her ear. "We'll wait out the storm there." Rebecca nodded, too exhausted and grateful to speak. She leaned back against the stranger's chest, letting the steady rhythm of his heartbeat anchor her as they rode through the maelstrom. The journey seemed both endless and brief. Time lost meaning in the disorienting swirl of sand and wind. Rebecca drifted in and out of awareness, the pain in her ankle throbbing in time with the horse's gait. The only constant was the firm presence of the man behind her, his arms steady around her waist as he guided them through the blinding conditions. Eventually, a structure materialized through the haze, a sturdy cabin built against the side of a rocky hill, partially protected from the worst of the storm. The man dismounted quickly and lifted Rebecca from the horse, carrying her to the door without apparent effort. Inside, the cabin was simple but well-maintained. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a small kitchen area and a wooden table occupying another corner. A bed stood against the far wall, with a chest of drawers beside it and a curtained area that Rebecca assumed concealed storage. The stranger set her gently in a chair by the unlit fireplace, then removed his bandana and hat, revealing a face that made Rebecca's breath catch. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps in his late 20s, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble and those remarkable blue eyes set beneath straight brows. His hair was the color of wheat, curling slightly where it brushed his collar. "Name's Gabriel Cooper," he said, moving efficiently to light the fire. "Most folks call me Gabe." "Rebecca Evans," she replied, still clutching his duster around her shoulders. "Thank you for your help, Mr. Cooper." A small smile touched his lips. "Just Gabe is fine." The fire caught, and he added more wood before turning his attention to her ankle. "May I?" At her nod, he gently examined her injury, his calloused hands surprisingly delicate. "Not broken, I don't think, but a bad sprain for sure." He rose and fetched a basin of water and some clean cloth. "This might sting a bit." As he cleaned the scrapes on her leg and wrapped her ankle, Rebecca studied him covertly. His movements were precise and confident, his focus absolute. He wore simple clothes, a faded blue shirt, sturdy trousers, and worn boots, but something in his bearing suggested he was more than an ordinary rancher or drifter. "You're a long way from anywhere," he observed, securing the bandage. "That stagecoach headed to Tucson." "Yes," Rebecca replied. "I'm joining my uncle there. He's a doctor." Gabe nodded. "Storm caught you by surprise, I'd wager. They come up fast out here." The driver said he was going for help, but he likely found the nearest saloon instead, Gabe finished with a wry smile. "Not the first time Cal Morgan has abandoned passengers. Won't be the last, either. You know him, know of him. I know most who pass through this territory." He stood and moved to the small kitchen area. "You must be hungry. I don't have much, but there's stew from this morning I can heat up." Rebecca's stomach growled at the mention of food, and she blushed. "That would be wonderful, thank you." While Gabe busied himself with preparing the meal, Rebecca took in more details of the cabin. A rifle stood propped in one corner, and a gun belt hung from a peg near the door. Books lined a rough-hewn shelf, more than she would have expected in a frontier cabin. A small desk beneath the window held papers and what looked like maps. "Are you a rancher?" she asked, curiosity overcoming her natural reserve. Gabe glanced over his shoulder. "Of a sort. I have some cattle, but I also work as a scout for the army sometimes, and I do some hunting and trapping." "You live here alone?" A shadow crossed his face. "Just me and Lazarus, that's my horse. Been that way for a couple years now." The way he said it suggested a story, but Rebecca didn't press. Outside, the storm continued to rage, wind howling around the cabin's sturdy walls. Despite the circumstances, she felt oddly safe in this stranger's home. Gabe brought her a bowl of savory stew and a chunk of bread, then poured them both cups of coffee. He sat across from her at the small table, his own bowl in front of him. "It's not fancy," he apologized, "but it'll keep you going." "It smells wonderful," Rebecca assured him, taking a spoonful. The stew was rich with meat and vegetables, perfectly seasoned. "This is delicious." A hint of pride flickered in his eyes. "My mother's recipe. She always said a man should know how to feed himself properly." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, the storm providing a dramatic backdrop to the cozy scene. Rebecca found herself studying Gabe's hands, strong and weathered, but with long, almost elegant fingers that handled the spoon and cup with unexpected grace. "Your family," she ventured. "Are they nearby?" Gabe's expression closed slightly. "No, lost my parents to cholera when I was 19. My sister married and moved to California." "I'm sorry," Rebecca said softly. "I lost mine to influenza just last year." Their eyes met, recognition of shared grief passing between them. "It's hard," Gabe acknowledged, "being left behind." "Yes," Rebecca whispered, feeling a connection to this stranger that transcended their brief acquaintance. "It is." After dinner, Gabe checked her ankle again, bringing a small jar of pungent-smelling salve. "My own mix," he explained, applying it gently. "Helps with swelling and pain." His touch was careful, almost reverent, and Rebecca felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire spreading through her. She'd never been alone with a man like this. Before Philadelphia society had strict rules about such things, but the usual protocols seemed irrelevant in this wild place. "The storm's settling," Gabe observed, glancing toward the window. "But it'll be full dark soon. You'll have to stay the night." He hastened to add, "I'll sleep by the fire. You can take the bed." "I couldn't put you out of your bed," Rebecca protested. "It's no trouble," he insisted. "I've slept in worse places than my own floor." Despite her exhaustion, Rebecca found herself reluctant for the day to end. "Could we talk a while longer, unless you're tired?" Gabe's smile transformed his face, softening the weathered lines and lighting his eyes. "I'd like that." He added wood to the fire and settled into the chair opposite hers. For the next few hours, they talked as the storm gradually subsided outside. Rebecca told him about her life in Philadelphia, her father's shipping business, her mother's work with orphan children. Gabe shared stories of his time as an Army scout, his small ranch, and the characters he'd encountered in the territories. "How did you find me?" Rebecca asked eventually. "In the storm, I mean." "I was checking on my cattle when I saw the stagecoach from the ridge. Looked abandoned, so I came down to investigate." His eyes held hers. "Lucky timing, I guess." "Very lucky," she agreed softly. When Rebecca finally retired to Gabe's bed, wrapped in a clean shirt he'd provided as a nightgown, she lay awake listening to him move quietly around the cabin, banking the fire and settling on his bedroll nearby. The storm had passed, leaving an intense silence broken only by occasional sounds of wildlife and the gentle breathing of the man who'd saved her life. Morning arrived with brilliant clarity, the desert transformed in the aftermath of the storm. Rebecca awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Gabe moving about the cabin. Her ankle felt better, though still tender when she tested it. "Good morning," Gabe greeted her, his hair damp from washing. "How's the ankle?" "Much improved," she said, self-consciously aware of her disheveled appearance. "Your remedy worked wonders," he smiled. "Glad to hear it. I've made breakfast, and then I thought we might see about getting you to Tucson." A pang of disappointment surprised Rebecca. Of course, she needed to continue her journey. Her uncle would be worried sick by now. But the prospect of leaving Gabe's cabin, of parting from this man who'd become more than a rescuer in the space of one evening, filled her with unexpected sadness. Over a breakfast of cornbread and eggs, Gabe outlined his plan. "I'll take you to Dry Creek. It's a small settlement about 10 miles south. The stagecoach runs through there on its way to Tucson. You think the others made it there?" "The passengers who left before me," Gabe nodded. "Most likely. It's the nearest place with shelter. They'll probably be on today's coach." After breakfast, Rebecca changed back into her now clean dress behind the curtained area while Gabe prepared Lazarus for the journey. Her clothing felt stiff and formal after the comfort of Gabe's shirt, a reminder of the life awaiting her in Tucson. The desert was spectacular in the morning light, the storm having washed the dust from the air and revealed colors Rebecca hadn't imagined existed in this seemingly barren landscape. Purples, reds, and golds painted the distant mountains, while closer at hand, tiny wildflowers had emerged overnight, dotting the ground with surprising bursts of color. Gabe helped her onto Lazarus, then mounted behind her as before. This time, however, without the urgency of the storm, Rebecca was acutely aware of his chest against her back, his arms around her waist as he held the reins. They rode in silence for a while, both seemingly content to absorb the beauty around them. "It's like a different world," Rebecca marveled, gazing at a formation of red rocks that seemed to glow in the sunlight. "The desert's always changing," Gabe replied, his voice close to her ear. "Most folks just see the harshness, but there's so much more if you take the time to look." They passed the abandoned stagecoach, now partially buried in sand. Gabe dismounted to check it, retrieving Rebecca's small trunk that had been left behind. He secured it to Lazarus before continuing their journey. As they approached a narrow pass between two rock formations, Gabe suddenly tensed. "Something's not right," he murmured, slowing Lazarus to a walk. "What is it?" Rebecca asked, alarmed by the change in his demeanor. "Not sure, just a feeling." His right hand moved to rest on the pistol at his hip. They had just emerged from the pass when 3 riders appeared ahead, blocking their path. Gabe immediately pulled Lazarus to a halt, his body language communicating wariness. "Well, look who it is," called the man in the center, a thin individual with a pockmarked face. "Gabriel Cooper playing knight-errant. Wade," Gabe acknowledged coolly. "Didn't expect to see you back in these parts." "Bet you didn't." Wade's gaze shifted to Rebecca, a slow smile spreading across his face. "And who's this pretty little thing?" "She's none of your concern," Gabe replied, his voice hardening. "We're just passing through." The man called Wade exchanged glances with his companions. "Thing is, Cooper, anything that happens in this stretch is my concern now, including who rides through and what they might be carrying." Rebecca felt Gabe's muscles tense against her back. "The lady's on her way to Tucson. We're headed to Dry Creek to catch the stage." "Is that so?" Wade's eyes narrowed. "And I suppose that trunk there is just full of ladies' fripperies." "Exactly that," Gabe confirmed. Wade dismounted, his movements deliberate. "Well, no harm in checking, is there, being as we're the law around here now." "Since when?" Gabe's voice was dangerously quiet, since Sheriff Miller had his unfortunate accident last month. Wade smirked. "I'm the new deputy." Rebecca felt Gabe's intake of breath. "Miller's dead," fell from his horse. "Terrible tragedy." Wade's mock solemnity didn't reach his eyes. "Now about that trunk." "The trunk stays closed," Gabe stated firmly. "Miss Evans is under my protection, Wade." "Whatever game you're playing, leave her out of it." Wade's hand moved to his gun. "Don't reckon you're in a position to be making demands, Cooper. Not 3 against 1. The tension crackled between them. Rebecca held her breath, fear coursing through her veins. She'd heard stories of lawlessness in the territories, but had never imagined finding herself in the middle of such a confrontation. 3 against 1 seems about fair," Gabe replied with unexpected calm. "For me, anyway." Wade's face flushed with anger. "Always were too big for your britches, Cooper. Maybe it's time someone took you down a peg." What happened next occurred so quickly that Rebecca could barely follow it. Wade went for his gun, but Gabe was faster, drawing and firing in one fluid motion. Wade howled, his pistol flying from his hand as a bullet grazed his arm. Before his companions could react, Gabe had shifted his aim between them. "Next one won't be a warning," he said evenly. Now back away, nice and slow." The two men glanced at each other, then at their injured leader. After a moment's hesitation, they raised their hands. "This ain't over, Cooper," Wade snarled, clutching his bleeding arm. "It is for today," Gabe replied. "Mount up and ride, and I might forget to mention to the federal marshal that Dry Creek's got itself an imposter for a deputy." Muttering curses, Wade climbed awkwardly back onto his horse. With a final venomous glare, he and his companions turned and rode away, dust billowing behind them. Rebecca released the breath she'd been holding. Who were they? Wade Thornton. Small-time outlaw with big ambitions. Gabe holstered his weapon, his movements precise. Used to ride with the Delaney gang until they cut him loose for being too trigger-happy. And he's now a deputy. Rebecca couldn't keep the shock from her voice. Not likely. Miller was a good man, too good to die in a riding accident. Gabe's jaw tightened. Sounds like Wade and his boys have moved in while the territory marshal is away. They continued toward Dry Creek more cautiously now, Gabe alert to any sign of pursuit. Rebecca's mind whirled with questions, but she remained silent, sensing Gabe's need to focus. When they finally crested a small rise and saw the settlement below, Rebecca felt conflicting emotions. Relief at reaching civilization warred with reluctance to end her time with this complex, intriguing man. Dry Creek consisted of little more than a main street with a handful of buildings, a general store, a saloon, what appeared to be a small hotel, and a few other structures. A stagecoach stood outside the hotel, being loaded with luggage. "Looks like we're just in time," Gabe observed, guiding Lazarus down the slope. As they rode into town, heads turned. Rebecca was acutely conscious of how they must appear a woman in a fine but wrinkled dress, riding intimately close to a rugged frontiersman. In Philadelphia, such a sight would have caused a scandal. Here, it barely warranted a second glance from most, though a few women exchanged knowing looks. Outside the hotel, Rebecca recognized the elderly couple from her stagecoach, along with the traveling salesman. They looked trail-worn but unharmed, and exclaimed with surprise and relief at her appearance. "My dear girl, we thought you lost in that dreadful storm," the older woman cried, embracing Rebecca after Gabe helped her dismount. "Mr. Cooper found me," Rebecca explained, gesturing to Gabe, who stood slightly apart, Lazarus's reins in hand. The stagecoach driver, a different man from the one who had abandoned them, announced they would depart in 15 minutes. The elderly gentleman helped retrieve Rebecca's trunk from Lazarus, thanking Gabe profusely. Left momentarily alone with Gabe, Rebecca found herself suddenly tongue-tied. How did one properly thank a man for saving one's life? For offering shelter, kindness, and protection? I don't know how to thank you," she began hesitantly. "No need," Gabe replied, his eyes softer than she'd seen them before. "I'm just glad I was there. Will you be all right, those men?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Wade's all bluster. He'll think twice before trying anything again." Rebecca nodded, though unconvinced. Something told her there was more to the story, more to Gabe's history with these men, more danger than he was admitting. "Your uncle will be waiting," Gabe said, glancing toward the stagecoach. "You should go." "Yes," Rebecca agreed, though she made no move to leave. Instead, impulsively, she reached out and took his hand. "Thank you, Gabriel Cooper, for being my shelter." His fingers tightened around hers, and for a moment something intense and unspoken passed between them. Then, reluctantly, he released her hand. "Safe journey, Rebecca Evans." Rebecca turned and walked toward the waiting stagecoach, each step feeling heavier than the last. As she reached the door, the driver already calling for passengers to board, she paused and looked back. Gabe still stood where she'd left him, tall and watchful, Lazarus patient beside him. In that moment, Rebecca made a decision that would alter the course of her life. Instead of climbing into the coach, she turned and walked back to Gabe, ignoring the curious stares and the driver's impatient call. "Miss Evans," Gabe's expression showed surprise as she approached. "I find I'm not quite ready for Tucson," she said, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "That is, if you wouldn't mind company on your ride home." Gabe's eyes widened. "You're sure?" "Your uncle can wait another day or two," Rebecca finished. "I'd like to thank you properly for saving my life. Perhaps I could cook you dinner. I make an excellent stew." For a moment, Gabe seemed speechless. Then a slow smile spread across his face, transforming his features and lighting his eyes with a warmth that made Rebecca's breath catch. "I'd like that," he said simply, extending his hand to her. The stagecoach departed without Rebecca Evans, carrying only a hastily penned note to her uncle explaining the delay and promising she would arrive safely in a few days. As it rumbled out of Dry Creek in a cloud of dust, Rebecca rode away in the opposite direction, seated once more before Gabriel Cooper on his Palomino horse, her heart lighter than it had been since before her parents' deaths. The next 2 days in Gabe's cabin passed in a haze of conversation, shared meals, and deepening connection. Rebecca discovered that beneath his reserved exterior lay a man of intelligence, humor, and surprising tenderness. He told her more about his past, his time as an Army scout, his brief career as a lawman in a mining town further north, his dreams of expanding his small ranch into something substantial. In turn, she shared her own hopes and fears, her uncertainty about her future in Tucson, her grief for her parents. Cooking together in his small kitchen, reading aloud from his collection of books in the evenings, or simply sitting in companionable silence watching the sunset paint the desert in spectacular colors, they forged a bond that defied the brevity of their acquaintance. On the morning Rebecca was to leave for Tucson, Gabe seemed unusually quiet. He'd agreed to escort her all the way to her uncle's home, unwilling to trust her safety to the stagecoach after their encounter with Wade and his men. As they prepared Lazarus for the journey, Gabe suddenly turned to her. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "about Wade claiming to be deputy." Rebecca nodded, wondering at the change of subject. "The territorial marshal should know about it. He's based in Tucson." Gabe continued checking Lazarus's saddle straps, not meeting her eyes. "Might be I should stay around there for a while. Make sure Wade doesn't cause more trouble." Hope bloomed in Rebecca's chest. "That seems wise," she agreed, trying to keep her voice neutral. "And then there's the matter of my supplies," Gabe added, still focused on the horse. "Running low on some things. Tucson's got a better general store than Dry Creek." "Much better, I'm sure," Rebecca said, a smile tugging at her lips. "Plus," Gabe continued, finally looking up to meet her gaze, "I've heard tell that Tucson has some land available, good grazing land. Might be worth looking into." Rebecca stepped closer, her heart thundering in her chest. "Gabriel Cooper, are you considering a move to Tucson?" He straightened, his eyes serious but warm. "I'm considering many things, Rebecca Evans, most of them having to do with not wanting to say goodbye to you." "Then don't," she whispered. Gabe reached out, gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, his touch sending shivers through her. "I don't have much to offer, just a small ranch and a life that's sometimes dangerous." "You offered me shelter when I needed it most," Rebecca replied, covering his hand with hers. "That's more than enough." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. When they parted, Gabe's smile held a certainty that made Rebecca's heart soar. "Your uncle might have something to say about all this," he noted wryly. Rebecca laughed. "Uncle Henry's greatest wish is for me to be happy." and I suspect he'll approve of a man who can handle himself in a desert storm." They reached Tucson 2 days later, their journey unmarked by further encounters with Wade Thornton or his men. Rebecca's uncle, after his initial relief at seeing his niece safe, took to Gabe immediately, particularly after hearing the full story of the rescue and learning of Gabe's background as a scout and sometimes lawman. The territorial marshal was equally interested in Gabe's report about Wade's activities in Dry Creek, deputizing Gabe on the spot to assist in investigating the situation and restoring proper law to the settlement. It was work that suited Gabe's skills and sense of justice, while allowing him to remain close to Tucson and Rebecca. 6 months later, on a clear spring day with the desert in bloom all around them, Rebecca Evans became Rebecca Cooper in a simple ceremony in her uncle's garden. By then, Gabe had purchased land just outside Tucson and begun building a ranch that combined the best of his frontier skills with his wife's eastern refinements. The cabin in the desert remained theirs as well, a retreat and a reminder of where their journey together had begun. On their first anniversary, they rode out to it, retracing the path they had taken through the storm. Standing in the doorway of the cabin, watching the sunset paint the desert in gold and crimson, Rebecca leaned back against her husband's chest, his arms encircling her just as they had that first desperate day. "Any regrets?" Gabe asked softly, his breath warm against her ear. Rebecca turned in his arms, reaching up to trace the now familiar contours of his face, the strong jaw, the laugh lines that had deepened over a year of happiness, the blue eyes that still took her breath away. "Not one," she assured him, rising on tiptoe to brush her lips against his. "You promised to be my shelter, Gabriel Cooper, and you have been in every way that matters." His answering kiss held all the passion and tenderness that had grown between them, a love forged in the crucible of a desert storm and tempered by the challenges and joys they had faced together. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, they stepped back into the cabin that had witnessed the beginning of their story, closing the door on the world outside and opening the next chapter of their shared life. In the years that followed, the Cooper Ranch flourished, as did their family. Their firstborn son arrived less than 2 years after their wedding, followed by twin daughters who inherited their mother's determination and their father's steady calm. The territory grew and changed around them, eventually becoming part of the state of Arizona. But the love that had sparked between a stranded Eastern lady and the cowboy who offered her shelter remained constant. A beacon as reliable as the stars over the desert, they both had come to call home.